Welcome to Congregation Lador Vador and this evening's program about Steve Israel's new book, The Einstein Conspiracy. I am Rabbi Stephen Moskowitz, and I have the privilege of serving as this congregation's rabbi. This evening, we are grateful to be partnering with Theodore's Books in Oyster Bay and Temple Beth Torah in Melville. Let me also acknowledge two officials who are joining us from Oyster Bay, Town Clerk Rich Lamarca and Deputy Commissioner Jim McCaffrey. I would like to tell you about an upcoming program here at the synagogue. In 2 weeks, on Tuesday, April 28th, we will welcome Father Walter Kajerski of St. Dominic's.
Tell them I'm busy.
In 2 weeks, on Tuesday, April 28th, we will welcome Father Walter Kajerski of St. Dominic's for a two-part Jewish Catholic dialogue series. Like all of our programs, this event is open to the community. We are most pleased to welcome Steve Israel back to our synagogue. Steve Israel served in the U.S. Congress between 2001 and 2017, including 4 years as chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. He left Washington to pursue new passions. In 2021, he opened a small independent bookshop, Theodore's Books, in the historic hometown of Oyster Bay, fulfilling a lifelong dream of his. He also directs the Nonpartisan Institute of Politics and Global Affairs at the Brooks School of Public Policy at Cornell University, which serves as a platform for civic engagement and bipartisan dialogue. He's written 3 widely praised novels, most recently The Einstein Conspiracy, a historic thriller. His other books include Global War on Morris and Big Guns. Steve Israel's commentary has been featured regularly on CNN, MSNBC, as well as the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Atlantic Magazine, and others. He was profiled on HBO's Last Week Tonight with John Oliver and has appeared on CBS's 60 Minutes. Israel's Little Roundup Productions is a creative development company that supports film, television, and stage projects. In Congress, he created the House Center Aisle Caucus and was recognized as a leader on national security issues and the Middle East. He lives with his wife, Kara, here in Oyster Bay, and has 2 daughters and 3 grandchildren. Rabbi Susie Moskowitz is the senior rabbi of Temple Beth Torah in Melville. Rabbi Moskowitz is on the board of the New York Board of Rabbis and is a past president of the Long Island Board of Rabbis. She was on the executive board of the Women's Rabbinic Network, a member of the Board of Education of the Solomon Schechter Day School of Nassau County, and chairperson of UJA's Long Island Rabbinic Advisory Council. She studies at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. She's receiving a certificate in applied positive psychology and recently completed a fellowship at the Jewish Studio Project. She is a 500-hour certified yoga instructor and is known for having created a Kabbalah yoga service that she has presented at conferences around the country. A native of Baltimore, Rabbi Moskowitz resides in Huntington with me. We have 2 children, Shira and Ari.
I think you could have put a little more emotion into the introduction.
With me. Please join me in welcoming Representative Steve Israel and Rabbi Susie Moskowitz to Congregation Lador Vador.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
I'll share a very quick, funny story. We were just in Morocco. We had a tri-temple trip, both our synagogues and a synagogue in Westchester that my sister happens to belong to, but she is not the rabbi, even though Rabbi Moskowitz's brother is a rabbi. And there was a woman who knew me. Her kids actually go to Beth Torah, we were Rabbi Susie, Rabbi Steve, and Rabbi Scott. We weren't Rabbi Moskowitz. It didn't come up. Midway through the trip, she goes over to Rabbi Scott and says, Rabbi Susie and Rabbi Steve look really friendly. Is there something going on between them? And fortunately, we could tease her about it. Like, she knew I was married to a rabbi, but didn't know it was that rabbi. One of the things that didn't come up in my bio was that I love to read, and I love to read historical fiction, so I'm thrilled that you wrote a historical fiction novel that was really fantastic.
Thank you.
It had so many twists and turns and captured a moment in time with little specific details that really rooted it in time. So it was so obvious that tons and tons of research went into it. And I also particularly liked that it was set on much of it was set on Long Island. So when you mention Oyster Bay or Yaphank or Southold, I don't think I've been to Yaphank, but all those other places I've actually been to. And it just always makes a book more fun. Of course, it means you have to really know your stuff because you got readers that are going to challenge you if something wasn't next to where it was supposed to be or things like that. So what made this moment in history, this event stand out? How did it even come to your attention?
Well, first, Rabbi, and Rabbi, thank you so much for your hospitality and for bringing us together to talk about books. I'm very grateful to you. And let me just acknowledge our town officials, Deputy Commissioner McCaffrey and Town Clerk Lamarca. The town of Oyster Bay has been so terrific to our independent bookstore, to our Gold Coast Book Fair, which we're staging again, May 16th and 17th. Thank you to the town for the support that you provide to local businesses. Appreciate it.
Maybe take a moment before you answer my question and just share what happens at the Gold Coast Book Fair.
The Gold Coast Book Fair, which is organized by Theodore's Books and our partners, is the largest book festival on Long Island. We're now in our third year. And we bring globally recognized, prominent, best-selling authors to Oyster Bay for 2 days. The town closes Audrey Avenue, and we sell and feature authors talking about books and books and books. We have among our authors in May are Susan Lucci, who has an autobiography that just came out, H.W. Brands, who has an extraordinary biography of George Washington. For those of you, anybody root for the Mets in 1986? Any Mets fans here? Mookie Wilson is coming. Will be coming to our book fair. That's Sunday. And just an extra, Joan London, Zippy Owens, who is just has a Jewish book club.
Stuff.
And it's completely bipartisan, so Congresswoman Elise Stefanik will be with us. She wrote a book about what happened on college campuses, the outbreaks of anti-Semitism. She will be with us, and you can just go to goldcoastbookfair.org if you'd like some information. We hope to invite you. It's just a wonderful moment that brings thousands of people together around the unifying concept that books are just good for democracy. No matter where you stand politically, books are good for democracy. So to answer your question, no, we're not. No. We're just going to do 2 days downtown, not at LIU.
So why this moment?
So, I never pretended to be the smartest member of Congress, although the competition wasn't always that stiff. But I loved history. I would sit in the Oval Office under 2 presidents, President Bush, President Obama, and I could hardly pay attention to the conversation, I will confess to you, because I was just in rapture with the history. I would say, oh my God, that's where John F. Kennedy sat. That's where FDR, made revisions on his Day of Infamy speech, and I would be so caught up in the history. When I left Congress, in rare form, unindicted and undefeated, which hardly ever happens, I had a book in me. I wanted to do historic fiction. I'd done 2 political satires, which did very well. But I wanted to do historic fiction. The only problem was I had no story. I was very much influenced by Ken Follett, who wrote Day of the Jackal, is extraordinary. Frederick Forsyth, who wrote, I have a little mental block. Whatever it was, about the assassination of de Gaulle. Very much influenced by them. And I wanted to do a historic spy thriller. To make a long story short, my wife and I own a house right here in Oyster Bay, but we also have a house out on the North Fork. And somebody had said to me, one of the leaders in Southold said to me, did you know that Albert Einstein used to live here? And I'd heard a little bit about that, and the historic sleuth in me began researching it, and sure enough, I found the cottage where he lived. And I said to my wife one day, take a ride with me. I want to go see this cottage. I want to see if it's still there. We got in the car and we drove on Nassau Point. And we show up at this cottage, and it's in its original form. Nothing has changed. And this is where Albert Einstein lived in the summer of 1939. But more importantly, and central to the plot, as you know, This is where Albert Einstein wrote a letter to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt telling him that Adolf Hitler was developing an atomic bomb and that we in the United States needed to do the same. Now, I had always known that Einstein was a lifelong pacifist, Rabbi, so my imagination began firing. Like, why did this lifelong pacifist suddenly make this transition to say to the President of the United States, build a bomb that can incinerate a city? And why here? Why this place? Why Southold, of all places? And I began researching, and I learned not only did he write the letter there, not only did he live there, but at the same time, Adolf Hitler was trying to assassinate him. And at the same time, the Nazis had embedded a widespread, sophisticated network of spies all over New York, in New York City, in Yaphank, on the East End, on the South Shore in the Hamptons, where a U-boat landed and discharged spies. And so I put it all together in this spy thriller, political conspiracy that conflates a little bit, but is based on absolutely true events, called the Einstein Conspiracy.
I was a little behind the times. On the way to Morocco, I actually watched Oppenheimer, the movie. So it was funny that I was watching that and then started reading the book. And then I also read A Family of Spies.
Yes, very good book. Yes.
Also recommended about a true spy story during this time that led to Pearl Harbor. So it was just kind of, I don't know, funny that I was reading 3 books. And they're very, this is not a Holocaust story, even though it certainly foreshadows the Holocaust happening. But it was based on a lot of actual events. So how did you separate fact and fiction? How did you work on creative license to be a fiction writer? And would you also talk about the musical piece between Einstein and Zwick?
Thank you for asking. It's very tricky when you're writing historic fiction, because at all times you're on the brink of writing either fiction or nonfiction. If you're too deep in the history, you're writing nonfiction. If you ignore the history, you're writing a novel. And I am just so rigid to the point of obsessed with historic veracity. And I fact-checked and checked again and checked again. I hired a research assistant. I wanted everything to be accurate. The problem with that is you can go down a rabbit hole. And so I'll give you an example. Now, raise your hand if you've not read the book, if you've not yet read the book. Okay, good. So I don't want to do any spoilers, okay? But I'll give you an example that won't spoil this. In February of 1939, this is how widespread the Nazi movement was in America. In February 1939, there was a pro-Nazi rally at Madison Square Garden. The marquee outside the building said, on the marquee, pro-America rally, and then under it, Rangers play Wednesday. And I found a picture of that marquee. 20,000 people crowded into Madison Square Garden that night, chanting, Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil. The speaker, who was the head of the Bund in North America, talked about how we must rid ourselves of the Jews and kept calling President Roosevelt President Rosenfeld. They marched up and down the aisles with swastika flags. And I researched that so deeply and wrote so vividly about it that my editor sent that chapter back to me with this note. If you want to write a book, Rabbi, about the Madison Square Garden rally, you're on the right track. But you're writing fiction. Take your 20 pages on the rally and trim it to 4. And it's about 5. So it's a constant balancing act. The bottom line is this. An author has a bargain with you as readers. The bargain is you're going to pay a certain amount for a book, and I'm going to keep you entertained. I'm going to keep you turning the pages. I'm going to enlighten you when I can, but make it propulsive. You pay me, and I give you something back, and that is a propulsive story that you cannot put down. And in order to maintain that propulsion, you've got to throw in the historic tidbits, but then move quickly to what's happening with this character, what's happening with that character, where are we going next?
I thought the parts about Columbia University and the research being done there were so interesting, and that tied in with watching Oppenheimer. And
Yes.
the anti-Semitism that happened on Columbia's campus
Yes.
in recent times, and to remember, that was where Jews could go and get an Ivy League education at a time when you couldn't go everywhere else. Kind of amazing.
Columbia, they were, Hitler had devoted himself to building an atom bomb. That was his war plan. He knew if he could get an atom bomb, game over. The United States wasn't even in the war. Remember, we didn't go into the war until the Japanese attacked. So Hitler knew that there was massive isolationist sentiment in America, that Roosevelt read Gallup polls, which he did, that 80% of Americans were against war with Germany. And Hitler believed that once I have the bomb, it'll be 100% of Americans because they don't want us to blow them up, and we will. So Hitler is, at all costs, directing and ordering his people to build him a bomb. And what do we have in the United States? A couple of scientists on the 8th floor of Pupin Hall at Columbia University, which is still there. I saw where they had their experiments. And Fermi at the University of Chicago. And that was the extent of our atomic research program. No government intervention at all, which is why that letter was it changed the world and hardly anybody knows about it. And it was written on Long Island. And that's what I found so precious about this story.
Oh, tell me about the musical piece between Zwick and Einstein.
So the musical piece is a bit of intrigue, and I don't want to give a lot away, but Einstein, Einstein became my best friend for 4 years. It took me 4 years to write this, and he became my best friend. I read everything I could about him and by him. As somebody who was miserable in science in middle school, it was a tough read. Some of the stuff was tough, but I learned about his passions, his eccentricities, his cleverness, his complications, his conflicts. And one of the things, he loved two things. He loved three things, really. He loved advocating for Jewish refugees in Nazi Germany, and we can talk more about that if you would like. He loved his violin, which he called his fiddle, and he loved sailing. He was a miserable sailor. A miserable sailor. We can talk about that too. And so in my research, when I realized that Albert Einstein lived in Nassau Point, a few weeks later I went downtown to, how many of you have ever been to Southold? Anybody? You know Rothman's department store? Right now it's Stone Street Coffee in Southold. Rothman's department store. Because I knew that Rothman's department store was there when Einstein was living there. And so I walk in one day and there's a guy, they have all these musical instruments at the time. They were selling just kind of used books and musical instruments. And I go up to this guy and I say, hello, I'm former Congressman Steve Israel. He goes, yeah, I know who you are. And that's usually not too good. I said, listen, I know it's a long shot, but I'm writing a book about Albert Einstein's time here. And I was wondering if you have any information. And he looks at me and he goes, do you know who I am? I said, no. He said, I'm David Rothman's great-grandson. Oh, wow. He said, would you like to see the violin that Albert played?
Oh my gosh.
So he took me in the back and showed me the violin that Albert Einstein played. He said, my great-grandfather, David, befriended Einstein. And here, this actually happened. I'll tell you this very quickly. Einstein, because he's forgetful, he's absent-minded, in real life, he comes out to Long Island on April 30th, 1939. And being a historian, if any of you have ever researched history, you know you always have to have a question. Why April 30th? Why not May 1st? Why April 30th? You know why April 30th? Because he was invited to open the World's Fair that night. It was the day of the World's Fair opening, and he was the evening speaker. And he figured, all right, I'll do that, and then I'll go out, and I'm going to relax in Southold. And he realizes when he gets to Southold, he wakes up the next morning, and he realizes, oh, my God, he said, he wore a suit to the World's Fair, and all he had was his dress shoes. How do you go sailing with dress shoes? How do you walk on the beach? So he goes to Rothman's. He walks in, and this is, I alluded to it in the book, but I had to cut a lot of it. He walks in, there's David Rothman, and he sees Einstein. And he says, "Can I help you, Professor?" And Einstein, a very thick German accent, he says, "Have you any sandals?" And Rothman said, "Yes, we do. Actually, I have one left." And he takes him to the back where he has a sundial. And Einstein says, no, sandals, sandal. And he points, and Rothman sells him a pair of sandals. You can Google this. Google Albert Einstein Southold, and there's a photograph of Einstein and David Rothman sitting together on the beach wearing those sandals.
Oh, like, it must have been so fun to discover all these things. Yeah. Let's take a different direction. Obviously, your career in politics shapes what you're interested in and the experiences you had. This novel has espionage. It has ideological struggles, a paranoia of the time, knowing that there were spies in the United States to a degree that I don't think I knew until I read the book. Do you see any parallels between the 1930s America and the tensions we face today? And were there things that you were able to say using the device of the novel?
Yes.
I mean, not that you're really, like as a rabbi, there are things I can and can't say. You're a little less hampered, but maybe messages that you can send through a novel that come across more palatable than speaking them.
So I will refrain from politics, but I will say that there were parallels that both the left and the right, both are guilty of. One, the rampant anti-Semitism of the time in 1939, open anti-Semitism. And whether you're at Columbia University chanting from the river to the sea because you're on the left, or you're wearing a Camp Dachau or a Camp Auschwitz t-shirt at the Capitol on January 6th, that's open anti-Semitism. And I wrote this contemporaneously. And so I wanted to, this is not preachy. I don't want to preach in this book. But I did want to enlighten Americans that there are times within our country where it goes too far. Now, what I learned in this book was that the anti-Semitism, unlike today, where generally it's refuted, Republicans and Democrats who are reasonable will find a way to condemn it, whether it's coming from the left or the right. Back then, it was so normalized that you could have a rally at Madison Square Garden with 20,000 people. And then I learned about Yapank. Who knows the history of Yapank? Yapank. They called it German Gardens. It was a Nazi training facility. The streets in Yapank were named Adolf Hitler Street, Joseph Goebbels Street, Hermann Göring Street. Now, the commissioners here, I want to make it clear, they weren't named because somebody painted a sign. The Suffolk County Department of Public Works made those signs because that was the postal address. Wow. And swastikas would fly next to American flags. I learned, get this, so normalized was this anti-Semitism that the Long Island Railroad decided that they could make money on Camp Siegfried. On weekends, tens of thousands of people would come from all over the metropolitan area and try and get to Yapank. Most of them would take a train, which the Long Island Railroad named the Camp Siegfried Special. The Camp Siegfried Special. So our government gave license to go to Camp Siegfried, where you would learn how to march up and down, goose-stepping, and chant Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler, and call for the extermination of Jews. And the Long Island Railroad said, that's fine, just make sure you pay your fare. Right? You can go on the train, and they would go on the train with swastikas, dressed as stormtroopers. And so, this is very long-winded, and I apologize, but we have to go, I don't care what your politics are, we have to guard against that seeping into our culture at all costs, because it could have been extraordinarily costly in 1939 and was coming very close to paying that cost.
Wow. Yeah, there was a Bund House restaurant on Bagatelle, where Temple Beth Torah is, like down south of Bagatelle. There was, what was it called?
It was called the Chateau.
The Chateau, right. Now the street is Chateau and the restaurant's not there, but like that's just one of the,
That was the meeting place for
the
the
Bund.
local.
Bund.
Yep.
The
Yeah.
meeting place, like it's really close. It's kind of crazy. There's something else that was, Tell us about the two FBI agents. So we had James Amos and Harry Weiss. Are they real people? Are they conglomerates of characters at the time? And what did they represent in the larger moral landscape of the time?
So every spy thriller has to have two things, antagonist, protagonist. Right? That's just the formula. And so the antagonist is a Nazi spy who was embedded on Long Island by Adolf Hitler to do harm to Albert Einstein. To do harm to Albert Einstein. The protagonists are these two FBI agents, James Amos and Harry Weiss. Now remember, this is 1939. A Jew and a black guy in the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover didn't exactly have DEI standards for his agents. So I have this Jewish guy and this black guy. They're partnered, trying to uncover this plot to harm Einstein. Harry is a complete invention of my imagination. Made him up, developed him, tried to add complexity, layer, dimension. James Amos is a real person. How many have been to Sagamore Hill? Yeah. Do you remember the last thing you were told when you went to Sagamore Hill? You stood at the bedroom where Theodore died. And the docent or the park ranger said to you, that is the bed that the colonel drew his last breath and died. And his last words were, anybody know what Roosevelt's last words were? James, will you please turn out the light? And so one day I said to the park ranger, well, who is James? And he looked at me like, wow, nobody ever asked that. He said, well, he said, James was Roosevelt's, quote, manservant. Manservant. I said, well, that's interesting. And so then I went down that rabbit hole and I started researching James Amos. And this is what I learned. James Amos was not just the manservant. He was hired by President Roosevelt to be the caretaker to the Roosevelt children, for which you should get a Nobel Prize. African American, father was a cop in Washington, D.C., happened to know Theodore Roosevelt, gets his son a job. He then becomes the valet to Roosevelt. When Roosevelt leaves the presidency, he becomes the bodyguard for President Roosevelt. Then he becomes his confidant, and then they become best friends. So that on the Theodore Roosevelt is at what we now know as Roosevelt Hospital in New York City. He's discharged on Christmas Day, 1918, sent back to Sagamore Hill, and he knows it's the end. And he says to his wife, get me James. He could have asked for anybody, literally in the world. He says, get me James. I tracked down through census records James's address in Jamaica. He lived with his wife Annie in Jamaica. James gets on the train, comes to Oyster Bay Station, walks up to Sagamore Hill, sees Roosevelt, and realizes it's just a matter of days. Roosevelt looks at him and says, James, will you give me a bath? James puts him in the tub. That tub is still there. And Roosevelt looks up at him and he says, James, you haven't hurt me at all. Will you put me to bed? He lifts him up, puts him in his nightgown, puts him to bed, and stays with him until he hears that death rattle and is with him when he dies, having just turned out the light. Now here's what I then learned about James Amos. It didn't end there. James Amos becomes the second African American to be hired as a special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, hired by J. Edgar Hoover, where he brings down Murder Incorporated, the Jewish assassin mob, brings down another Nazi spy ring, and brings down elements of the mafia. And he dies in obscurity in 1954. I called the FBI. You know, being a member of Congress has a few perks, so I called the FBI. I said, open up the vault for me. You know, I want to read about James Amos. They said, well, you can just go to FBI.gov. We have him online. They gave him 3 paragraphs on the internet site. I paid a ridiculous amount of money to a bookseller, rare bookseller in Australia, to get his autobiography, which is called A Hero to His Valet. My Life with Theodore Roosevelt, A Hero to His Valet. And I decided, in 1939, Amos was with the FBI in New York City on Foley Square. He worked for the FBI. He would have been assigned this case. And so I decided to give him the life that he deserved in this book.
Oh, that's fantastic. Wow. Did you go out to German gardens?
I did. Has anybody ever driven through what is now? Yeah, it's eerie, I will tell you, because not much has changed. The street signs have changed. They took down the street signs as we got very close to World War I. And so now Hitler Street is Oak Street. And so I drove through a couple times. Those little cottages are still there. Some of them are expanded. But to me, it was a very eerie experience, having researched exactly how dark and violent and hateful that place was. You can kind of still sense it.
Just in your talking, it made me think about like Germantown, Pennsylvania. Do you know if that was also, or is that just Germantown?
I don't know.
I mean,
yeah.
like I know in Israel, in Jerusalem, there's a German town, but it's just because the houses were the style. Well,
Right.
German immigrants
Right.
moved there, but it's the style of the houses also. There's nothing sinister about it, as far as I know. But I didn't know that. Well, I knew there was something sinister about German gardens,
Yeah.
but it's very interesting. How was this different than writing the other books you wrote that weren't really historical fiction? They were more
Yeah.
contemporary political commentaries.
Completely different. The 2 prior books that I wrote, The Global War on Morris and Big Guns, were political satires. And so it's like writing a monologue, a late night monologue. Writing is fast, very rhythmic, tongue-in-cheek. You got to have a certain number of jokes per page. And I enjoyed it, but very quick. I mean, no research. And I wrote both of those books as reflections of my time in Congress. The Global War on Morris and Big Guns, you know who had the option to make those a TV and a movie project? Rob Reiner. It was extraordinary. I got a call one day from somebody saying, Rob Reiner wants to meet you. He wants to turn your books into a movie. And so I went to see him. Now, I'm going to embarrass myself. One of my favorite films of all time is This Is Spinal Tap. Not the most sophisticated film. And that was Reiner's film. And so I found myself doing dialogue with Reiner. And so he took the option on both books. And I learned that when somebody takes the option to make a book a movie, it's like when I was in Congress and I introduced a bill that was referred to committee, it's the same problem. In other words, it's not going anywhere.
So we might not see those movies, but maybe this one.
Well, this one, I did a book event in California. I've been on national book tours. It's wonderful to do this at home versus all over the country. And I was just in Pasadena a few weeks ago at Vroman's Bookstore. And there were several studio executives there who took the book, and so now I'm waiting to hear from them as to whether it has life in film or television.
Have you started your next book?
I have an idea on the next book. I'll be very honest. Now that I'm out of Congress, I can be nothing but honest. I just fell in love with the James Amos character. And many people who've read the book, and I'd be curious, to those of you who read the book, many folks have said to me, oh, well, your sequel is James Amos and Harry Weiss. What do they do next, right? This isn't exactly a spoiler alert, but Einstein doesn't die, right? And the FBI figures it out. And so many people have said to me, boy, what a sequel it would make, for James Amos and Harry Weiss in the 1940s World War II New York, when the FBI was still pursuing Nazis. But you also have the Jewish mob that was so active, that was murdering people left and right, put it all together. But here's the deal. I cannot write a sequel unless the publishing industry says the first one did so well that we want a second. And so that's why I'm so aggressive about book tours. And the book is doing extremely well. It's overperforming. It's doing better than my publisher thought it would. We're doing well. But my job is to get the numbers up so that when I do a proposal to the publisher for the sequel, the first thing they look at is how much money did we make on the first book, and will we make the same or more on the second one?
And does it help if we buy hard copy and paperback as opposed to Kindle, or both help your numbers?
Well, both help the numbers, but I will say, as an independent bookstore owner,
Bye.
don't use the K word with us.
And do you have an audio version?
And by the way, you can, but there's a new thing. For those of you who want to support independent bookstores, whether it's mine or anybody else's, there's now a competitor to Kindle. It's called bookshop.org. And so you can go to bookshop.org, order a book, and tell them that you want to order it via Theodore's Books. We do nothing. They just send the check to us. Versus Amazon, glomming on 100% of it. But you can't read it on a Kindle. You can only read it on an iPad. But it is a good alternative to Amazon, which makes keeping my bookstore open almost impossible. It's very difficult to keep an independent bookstore operating against this behemoth that kind of undercuts us at every opportunity they can, because they can.
No, that's helpful to know, and I've used Bookshop.
Oh, you have? Oh, good.
Yeah,
did you tell them Theodore's Books?
I think I did, yeah.
Good.
I did, actually. That was good. One of the reviewers wrote that this book expresses a moral urgency. The story isn't just about stopping a kidnapping. It's about confronting complacency in the face of extremism. Was that a message you were trying to express, and how?
It was. And so on that Madison Square Garden scene, I know it sounds horrible, 20,000 Nazi Americans calling for the elimination of Jews, calling for an American Hitler, 100,000 Americans outside of Madison Square Garden saying, go home, go home, go home. They were not complacent. Albert Einstein, under significant threat by the Nazis in this completely exposed cottage in Southold, taking out his sailboat, thoroughly incompetent. I mean, people had to go rescue him in the Peconic Bay. He was banned from sailing in Carnegie Lake in Princeton because the Princeton Yacht Club just got sick and tired of going to rescue him. But the fishermen, the shellfish people, the merchants, when Albert went out to sail, everybody kept an eye on him. So that's an important part of the story, that Americans were pretty decent, most of us, and we will not be complacent when we see threat and danger. And that was kind of what I was hoping would be the undertone to the story. And they saved Albert Einstein.
Yeah, so that's pretty amazing. You had a fascinating picture on the cover of the book of all the leading scientists of the time. Why did you pick it? What's the story behind that?
You are good, Rabbi. You can't see it now. You'll see it if you get the book outside. I came upon this photograph of Albert Einstein at the Savoy Conference. He used to attend these conferences with the world's smartest scientists. And I came upon this picture. Now, here again is where you have to be a bit of a detective. So I saw this picture, and there's Albert. And you can't see it. It's on the hardcover. You can't see it on the softcover, but this is where Madame Curie was. And here is, you can't see it here because we're not up close, but this is the dashing, handsome Heisenberg standing, and Heisenberg stuck with Hitler and helped try to develop an atom bomb, although there's some debate as to how serious he was about it. But I noticed something. And every single scientist in this picture either has their hands folded or at their sides, except for one. If you look really carefully, Albert Einstein is clutching his chair. He's clutching his chair. And when I noticed that, I said, well, why? Again, a good historian. I said, why? Why is he clutching his chair? Because he felt uncomfortable. He felt vulnerable. He must have felt insecure. There's something going on in his head telling him that he needed to be worried. He needed to keep himself safe and secure. And so when I saw that picture, I insisted that my publisher use it, and then they came up with the target effect.
That's very cool. It was interesting also that physics is a young people's science. Was a theme that came up more than once in the book. So even if Einstein didn't have another amazing discovery like E equals mc squared, that the influence he had in other spheres, the way he took care of refugees.
Yes.
And that was his downfall in the book, and obviously something we think is positive.
Yeah, I'll just say two things on that. Number one, Einstein was very careless about his security. His wife, Elsa, was his fierce protector. And he was completely naive, vulnerable. They let me into his house on Mercer Street in Princeton. It's still there. They let me in. And she would yell at him because students wanted to visit him, faculty. They literally would just walk in. They wouldn't even knock. They'd walk in. When he's under threat from Hitler, there were 2 attempts on his life. He ends up in Belgium. And he's hidden in this beachfront compound. And the Queen of Belgium, this is true, the Queen of Belgium was so worried about his security that she assigns a royal security detail to guard him. And he insists on going out every day for his walk. And the security detail said, no walks, you're forbidden. And then the next day, this is true, this is documented, he sneaks out. And they find him, they bring him back. And Elsa is fuming, and this is in the book. And she says, did you know the Femi, which is a Nazi hit squad, they have a $5,000 bounty on your head? To which Einstein says, I didn't know my head was worth that much. This is true. Completely vulnerable and quite naive. Now, on the other hand, he was extraordinarily clever. And yes, he had this image, the wacky hair, the absent-mindedness, the rope tied around his pants, always barefoot because he would lose his shoes, the befuddled, quintessentially out of central casting, absent-minded professor. That was a caricature that he projected. He worked very hard projecting that image. Why? Because he realized that for as long as that image gave him fame, he could use that fame to advocate on behalf of Jews in the old country. FDR wouldn't take a letter from some scientist, but he did take the letter from Albert Einstein. And Einstein devoted himself. In his office, there were 3 piles of correspondence that Mrs. Dukas, his secretary, would set up every morning. Letters from his friends and colleagues, invitations to endorse stuff, right? And then invitations to speak on behalf of Jewish refugees. And the only pile that he cared about was, how can I speak on behalf of Jewish refugees, save them in Nazi Germany, using my credibility. He was the original influencer.
That's pretty fantastic. You end the book with a beautiful quote. For all of its misery, he thought, it was a world worth saving.
Yes.
And today we so often feel like, should we bring new children into the world? There's so much evil in the world. I don't think it's the worst time we've ever lived through. In some ways, it's the best time in history we've ever lived through. But how do you confront the evil that you've worked so hard to combat professionally and in your private life too, and stay hopeful for the future of America and the world?
I take the advice of my favorite president of all time, Theodore Roosevelt, our local hero. People come into the bookstore all the time, and it doesn't matter, right, left, most right in the middle, and they say, oh my God, it's so overwhelming. What do we do? I can't cope. It's such a struggle. What do we do? And I remind them of what Theodore Roosevelt said. He said, do what you can with whatever you have, wherever you are. That's it. And so, 20,000 people in Madison Square Garden, paint a sign that says go home, and show up, part of 100,000 that encircled Madison Square Garden. There's a threat, anti-Semitism on a college campus or wherever it may be. Condemn it. Do what you can with whatever you have, wherever you are. And when we do that, we America always emerges better off. I'll just say one other thing on this. That one of the gifts that I have is I lecture at Cornell University. And while I'm rather dystopic about the immediate future, and frankly, both sides of the aisle, and getting us out of it, I have to tell you, when I'm in the classroom with the next generation of leaders, I am just elevated. They are critical thinkers. They have no tolerance for intolerance. Their view is, okay, you screwed this up as much as you can, Congressman. Now just tell us what we need and we'll take it from here. They elevate me on both sides of the aisle. So we've just got to get to that next generation and hope that they have the critical thinking skills and put this aside, because this is the root of all evil right now, in my view. Put it aside, read books, and lead. And that's what makes me so fundamentally optimistic about our future.
I like that. Thank you. I know that you are willing to take questions
Sure.
from our lovely audience,
Yes.
our crowd, and we have a
Whatever you have in mind.
roving microphone.
And we have a roving rabbi with a microphone. He's a triathlete, I just learned. I'm a non-athlete.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
It was great.
Thanks
Thank
to the
you,
rabbis
Rabbi.
as
It was
well.
so insightful. The questions led to an amazing discussion. I'm a huge fan of historical fiction, so I cannot wait to read your book. Huge Ken Follett fan also. He writes like he's actually living in that time.
Day of the Jackal was the title that I had until last
I was a
time.
Pillars
Yeah.
of the Earth,
Yes.
Tom the Builder.
Yes.
But I think Rabbi kind of addressed what I was going to say. And without getting too political, we are so divided. It
Yeah.
seemed like you started to talk about, can we find a way back?
Yeah.
And I think with the answer to that question and putting the phone away, you kind of addressed that for me.
Well, with your permission, I can go another minute on this, because I've devoted my post-Congress career to figure out how we heal. Not how to go further left, right, but how we get together and go forward. And I have a Substack that deals with this issue, and I write regularly on what we need to do to come together. And there's, I just did a post called Steve Israel's 5 Rules for Political Sanity. And it's getting a good response. And so what do we have to do? First of all, there's not going to be any kind of communal healing. We all have to heal individually. The most important thing we can do was an idea given to me by Malcolm Gladwell. I interviewed him at Long Island University several weeks ago at a bookstore event. And I asked him that question. I said, what do we do? It's information overload, it's algorithm, social media. We have opinions based on illusions. We're in 2 tribes, and this is what he said. This is the most indispensable advice I can give you, and it's number 5 in Steve Israel's 5 Rules for Political Sanity. He said, hold your values close, but your ideas loosely. Think about that. Don't give up your values. But if you want to heal, if you want to come together, leave room for somebody else's opinion. Leave room for the possibility that you're not always right about everything. Find somebody, and whether it's, you can disagree with them on 90% of issues, just talk to them about the 10%. That in itself brings us together. And I test this out, and it works. It works. Hold your values close, but your ideas loosely.
Thank you. We had
Thank you again for coming.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. One is about, in the end, when he was saved,
Yes.
when Albert Einstein was saved, was the intent to bring him back to Germany and kill him?
Yeah.
Or was the intent for him to work on their
Yes.
bomb?
So, in real life, Adolf Hitler hatched a plot to kidnap Winston Churchill, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and Joseph Stalin at the Tehran Conference in World War II. Had the plot. went to the Abwehr, which is German military intelligence, and said, figure it out. They were executing it. They were going to, could you imagine how outlandish that is? Kidnap FDR, Churchill, and Stalin, but Hitler thought he could do it. And so I used that actual event as a basis for a plot that Hitler and Heydrich developed to kidnap Albert Einstein, bring him back to Germany, so that he cannot advise the Americans on an atomic weapons program, but in fact, under duress, would assist Hitler in developing the program. And this is one of the great, anti-Semitism will backfire from time to time. For example, you know why Hitler didn't get the bomb? You know why he didn't get the bomb? Because he expelled all the Jewish physicists. They were at Columbia. They were at the University of Chicago. They were at Caltech in Pasadena, leaving behind Heisenberg and Otto Hahn as arguably two scientists at that level who could figure it out. And Otto Hahn was not a Nazi. He didn't want to really help. So Hitler's great, talk about a backfiring. Had he not expelled them, we don't know whether they would have participated in developing an atom bomb, but they now were able to assist America in developing it. And so Hitler feels, and there's that scene where Hitler says, what about, where are all these, why can't my scientists give me a bomb? And Admiral Canaris has to say to him, well, because you kicked them all out. You kicked out the smart ones. And he says, well, we're going to have to get him back. Bring me Einstein. Bring me Einstein. And if you can't bring him to me, as the story develops, then kill him. And that's what this psychopathic Nazi spy is trying to do.
We had a film at the temple that was a silent film that was found in a French flea market. And I can't remember the name of it, but these amazing composers wrote a score, because it's a silent film. It was created in 1923, and it's about kicking all the Jews out of somewhere in Europe. I don't remember if it was Germany or Czechoslovakia. And then the fashion industry falls, the theater industry falls, the newspaper industry falls, and it was in 1923 that this movie was made. It was really mind-boggling. And then that it's happening over again. I know we had a few more hands.
Sure.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you, rabbis. The book is fantastic.
Thank you so much.
I'm still reading it, but two thoughts. One is a question.
Yeah.
The situation in Milwaukee with Amos protecting Roosevelt, was that fiction or was that real?
Mostly true.
He really did have a bullet.
He had a bullet. So this happened. I went to the site. Roosevelt, post-presidency, he runs for president again on the Bull Moose Party. He's in Milwaukee going to a speech. He's in a car. He's standing up. Somebody jumps out of the crowd, shoots. Bullet hits Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt had just a little bit of security at the time. His driver turns and says, "Are you okay?" Roosevelt says, "He just nicked me." No, he just pinkied me. He just pinkied me. He just pinkied me. No problem. He goes to the speech. They're saying, "No, we have to get you to the hospital." He goes to give the speech in Milwaukee. He gets up there famously, and he says, "I've been shot, but nothing can stop a bull moose." And he proceeds to speak. Now, the reason he didn't die is because he had a 50-page speech in his pocket and his eyeglass case. It saved his life, but the bullet lodged in his chest. And he began, this is not well known. People think he gave the speech and then, he was fine. No, several minutes into the speech, he had to stop. There's this myth that he went on for 3 hours. No, he didn't. They take him to the hospital, they take x-rays, and they say, if we do surgery, you probably won't make it. You have a chance of surviving with this bullet in your chest. And James Amos, now here's what I'm not sure about. We don't know whether James Amos was on the scene. He probably would have been because he was the bodyguard. But there's no record that says that Amos was there with him. I wasn't able to find anything. In the book, he's not there. He's not there with Roosevelt. And he lives with that guilt. And he wonders when Roosevelt dies that night, January 1919, and he hears that death rattle, he wonders, is it the bullet that I couldn't stop that's now penetrated his chest? And he lives with that guilt, which is why he will not let anybody harm Albert Einstein. He feels that guilt of the harm that was done to his hero, Theodore Roosevelt.
So thank you. That's fascinating. So the second, and maybe the more important question is, you mentioned that the German government or Hitler was looking to, or they did expel all these great scientists. What was the logic, you think?
Well, the logic was that, like everything else, anything that had any kind of Jewish connection was considered to be contaminated, corrupted. In fact, they called physics, the Nazi name for it was dark physics or magical physics. Why? Because the Jews were behind it. And then they created something called Aryan physics, which was different from the theory of relativity or quantum entanglement or any of the other elements of physics. And so, like everything else, synagogues, theaters, law firms, town offices, anything related to Jews was purged for an Aryan replacement.
Thank you very much. I'll repeat everybody else. Thank you so much. Your talks are always wonderful.
Thank you.
I was wondering, when you were doing your research, if you came across the book The Other Einstein?
Yes,
and
of
if
course.
you happened to
Such a
find that
wonderful-
interesting, did it add to your own story?
It's a
And can you
great-
make large print, please, because I have to get everything on my
And say what? I'm sorry?
large print.
Large
I
print.
didn't buy your book because I can't see it
Yeah.
anymore.
I did, my wife read The Other Einstein. I did not read it, but I questioned her about it, and then I skimmed it, and it added to Einstein as a real person and not just a one-dimensional caricature. Look, he was no saint. He was a philanderer. He was a horrible philanderer. He mistreated his first wife. He mistreated his children. He was just horribly narcissistic. That complexity is important, and it's important even in this story because characters, you just can't make them one-dimensional. You have to do the whole deal in order to make them believable.
Once again, great book.
Thank you.
I do want to make one comment. In Southold, for people, there is actually a beautiful bust of Albert Einstein
Yes.
in Einstein Square, which
right.
is where the store was.
Yes.
Okay. So, and there are other little tidbits of Albert Einstein all over the place if you know where to look. It's
Yes.
just it's kind of fascinating that little place has got so much history to
That's
it.
for sure.
Yep.
And there's a beautiful there's a massive mural of that painting of Albert and David Rothman sitting on a boulder at Nassau Beach. And Rothman has the newspapers under his arm, and there's Albert in the sandals that he bought from Rothman's.
When I was in Princeton, I had a funeral, unfortunately, and the hearse driver was driving me back to get my car, and we drove past Albert Einstein's
That
house, and
house.
he pointed
Oh.
it out. I didn't even know to look for it, so it was kind of cool, and they're very proud.
It's there, and Einstein, and this is him, he didn't want to become a tourist attraction, and so he bequeathed it to the Institute for Advanced Science at Princeton, and the rule is it's faculty housing. So you can only access it if you live there as a member of the faculty. And there again, a member of Congress, former member, pulls a few strings, and they let me go in when it was vacant.
Hi. I just have a question from your research
Yeah.
about that Nazi camp that was out. Because we had a lecturer that came to our synagogue that talked about that camp. And the way they were saying that even today they have the names still there of some of the streets. Wasn't she saying on the bus
yeah,
stop?
some of the streets, but not the offensive ones. So I believe there is a Berlin Gardens Street or something like that, like a guard.
Because I know there was a
They
big,
took down the Nazi names. They left some of the original names
because
that were not
there's still a
offensive.
big fight going on in some of these areas, I think, from what it was like
that
a
was
couple of
interesting.
years
She's a
ago.
librarian out east and
Yes.
just got really interested in the area.
Yeah. At our book fair, we have an author who specializes in Nazi history on Long Island. He and I will be doing a panel on Nazism on Long Island in the 1930s and 1940s.
Oh, interesting.
I think Rabbi right here.
Oh.
Rabbi, you asked a question about the music and
The-
got off track.
I'm sorry.
I read the book, I loved it.
Mhm.
So could you talk a
Yes.
little bit about the music? That'd be great.
So I don't want to give away too much here, but one of the things I learned was why did Einstein love music so much? Because it was like physics, right? And so what is physics? It's all sorts of symbols, right? It's rhythm, it's time. What is music? It is time, it is rhythm. And so is the exploration of physics. And so he ties together that love of physics and that love of music. And the music plays a very important role across the story.
Is it true that there was a composition?
No.
Okay.
No.
I love
no.
that
So
part.
there was no, you're talking about Zwick, Professor Zwick in Germany has this competition with Einstein to write a violin piece called Two Scientists Debate, completely fictionalized, made that up in order to
It sounded
propel the
very-
story, in order to
yeah.
keep the story moving. They call that artistic license.
First of all, thank you.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you so much for.
Of course.
And I was just wondering, obviously, you did research on Einstein for
Yeah.
the novel, and learned he was a pacifist.
Mhm.
Did your opinion of him ever change? Like learning he was the one that really kickstarted and
Yeah.
he led to the atomic bomb.
I don't know whether my opinion changed, but it certainly deepened the more I got to know him. And I wasn't kidding when I said he became my best friend over 4 years. I mean, I just lived through him, learned everything. What he liked macaroni, learned that. I will tell you that one of my favorite qualities about him, and it emerges in the book, and I'm not giving too much away, is he held his values close, but his ideas loosely. He never believed that you could build an atomic bomb. And that's a tension point in the story. There's a scientist, real guy, Leo Szilard, crazy, eccentric, wacky scientist who flees from Hungary, gets a job at Columbia, and he's convinced that if you split an atom, you can create an atom bomb. Now, in real life, Otto Hahn in Nazi Germany splits an atom in December of 1938. And this is true. He goes to Einstein. He says, oh my God, they split an atom. It can be a bomb. And Einstein says, even if you could split an atom, you wouldn't create enough energy to light a dim bulb. And then he says, and it would be like shooting birds in the dark. So he refuted Szilard. And Szilard is you've got to understand, if you can't understand this, Adolf Hitler's going to have a bomb and we're not. And Einstein is stubborn, stubborn, stubborn. Also, he did not like Szilard. Why? Because he was Szilard's professor in Switzerland. And Szilard, in real life, one day stood up in class and said to Professor Einstein, the great Einstein, you're wrong, in front of everybody. And Einstein never forgave him for that. So he doesn't like, and I love this, human nature. I love when human nature intersects with history. So he just doesn't like Szilard. He's annoying. Szilard is completely eccentric, has horrible allergies. Einstein just doesn't like him at all. But the fate of the world rests on Szilard convincing Einstein that Einstein's wrong again. And then one day, Einstein says, prove it. And that's what happens in the 8th floor of Pupin Hall. In March, Szilard splits an atom. And he calls Einstein. He says, I've done it. And Einstein says, prove it. It's not until July that Szilard decides, I've got nothing to lose. He gets in a car and drives it to the North Fork to prove to Einstein that he's wrong. He's so absent-minded, he doesn't even know where Einstein lives. And so he's driving you're from Southold, he's driving all over the North Fork saying, where does Einstein live? And and nobody's going to tell him because they're protecting him. And then finally a kid, an 8-year-old, says, oh, I think he's up at Doc Moore's cottage. So he drives to the cottage and he says, he sits down with Einstein, and this is where, I know that was long-winded, but this is where I realized that you've got to hold your ideas loosely. So Lard says, let me prove it to you. And he's lecturing Einstein on the back porch that is still there. And Einstein listens and listens, and then finally Einstein looks at him and he says, why didn't I think of that? We must warn the president. And the rest is history. Yeah. And that's why I thought that's when my opinion of Einstein really, it was strengthened, that he at least had the ability to admit that he was wrong.
Thank you. What a wonderful night.
Thanks,
what
everybody.
A wonderful
Thank
book.
You. I hope you enjoyed the book.
Good. And I know we have copies outside.
I'm happy to sign books, yes.
And you'll sign for us?
Of course, happy to do that.
That would be great.
And let's thank the rabbis, plural, the plural rabbis, and the president of Lador Vador.
Yes, well, we're so glad this worked.
Thank you. No, I was happy to do it. Thank you.
What a beautiful...